Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Script, the series about how to improve everything and everyone around your media, broadcast, and post production workflows and career. Today, we're stepping into some of the most visually expressive crafts in all of post production, visual effects and color. We're also going to get a little bit into augmented reality production as well. My guest today has spent over 35 years shaping the way audiences, whether they knew it or not, feel about what's on the screen. He's a compositor, a colorist, a director, a filmmaker, executive producer, and editor whose fingerprints are over 100 films. You've seen his work: Titanic, The Fifth Element, Guardians of the Galaxy, The Avengers, Harry Potter, Armageddon, all the DreamWorks animation features. He's worked at companies like Sony Pictures, ImageWorks, Technicolor, Autodesk, Jaunt VR. He's also a teacher and lecturer who has taken his knowledge to universities all over the world. He's also a Wisconsin farm guy, a grandfather, and someone who genuinely cares about mentoring the next generation of craftspeople. Jeff Olm, welcome to The Script. Really glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Always great to catch up with you.
Excellent. So, Jeff, let's start at the beginning. As every hero needs an origin story, you grew up in Appleton, Wisconsin. It's not exactly the epicenter of Hollywood post-production. I know that as 2 out of 3 of my kids finished high school in Appleton. So how does a kid from Appleton end up becoming a compositor on Titanic, working with James Cameron? And I think there is some cable making somewhere in that journey between those points.
Yeah, I got very lucky. I went to school, University of Wisconsin Oshkosh, and I actually worked for Appleton's only TV station in the Green Bay market, Channel 32. Started out as a master control operator. I got that job from a friend who was a sales guy, but I hung out in master control at the university, so I knew how to run 2-inch tape, and we also had a 1-inch machine. So, I was thinking about what to speak about, and really running tape got me my first opportunities, in the business. So then I worked for Channel 26, and I was a camera guy on some really great shows like The Polka Show, Strikes and Spares for Cash, and a rock and roll show that we shot in Fond du Lac called Night Sight. So that station group, I went to NAB, my first NAB in '86 in Dallas. It snowed, and then the master control engineer had told me, Jeff, you should really go to this. So I went. I had an interview at the studios at Las Colinas, and I got a phone call before I left, and it was the TV station in Green Bay. They said, hey, do you want to drive the remote truck out to Hollywood? And I said, sure. I had my degree in hand. Drove the truck 4 days, ended up at the Hollywood Roosevelt, where the first Academy Awards were, across from Mann's Chinese Theater. And I stayed there for a month working on a TV show. So that show ended. Because I knew tape, I went to the videotape company, ran tape for a year, and then I got very lucky. I went to a USC post-production seminar that Rich Thorne was at, and Bernie Laramie from Max Headroom. And then I saw the post group. He talked about the post group, and they were doing Max Headroom. And I said, that's what I wanted to do. And I got in there, worked with great guys that like Steve Purcell, Fred Raimondi. I was doing Star Trek: The Next Generation. Steve and I were doing Prince videos and concerts and things. And then I went to Orlando. That's actually where the cable making came in. Andy Deli, a famous Hollywood engineer, was building a facility for Disney with the Post Group. And we set up an attempt facility, did a small show. I made laser discs and ran 1-inch. And then Andy and I built the facility from the ground up. So when there wasn't sessions going on, I was building cables, putting connectors on, and all that things. Then I went back to the post group, and the post group was really, the post group had just built the digital center. So they had the Abacus A64, the Abacus switcher, and all that stuff. I think that was the 84. And I maintained those post-group relationships through there. Then I went to Nashville. I did country music videos. Then that ended, and I went to SIGGRAPH, and I had all my friends from the Post group had gone to digital domain. Fred Raimondi was there in the commercial department. Brian Grill was there as a compositing supervisor, and I had called them. It was before phones, and AOL had just started then. We were sending EDLs back and forth to facilities, and I called them up and I said, "What are you guys doing?" They go, "Ah, we got this little show, French director, Luc Besson, called The Fifth Element." And then Jim Cameron, who's part owner, is got this little show called Titanic that he's shooting. And he's shooting down in Mexico. And I said, "Well, that sounds good. I got nothing else happening." So I went to SIGGRAPH in New Orleans, interviewed with Price Pethel, and then called my wife, said, "Hey, I got a gig in LA." And she goes, "Where are we going to live?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Well, let me sell the house and things." So I went out to LA, worked on The Fifth Element, Titanic, which I had no free time anyway. So we did 16-hour days, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And it was all because of my relationships that I had made at the Post group that I was able to get there. And then I went to DreamQuest in Simi, and I moved to Simi Valley, where you live. And we lived there for 23 years. And then I went to Sony ImageWorks, worked on Castaway, What Lies Beneath, Harry Potter, Spider-Man 1, all kinds of stuff. And then I just became a nomad flame artist from that point. And then I went to work for Autodesk with the great Dave Sampson. He said, so I was the West Coast demo guy. And then the day I started, they said, "Okay, we just acquired this company called Colorfront." And he goes, "Ohm, you're the film guy. You're now the luster guy too." So that is how I got into being a colorist. So it was the first software-based color correction system. I was blessed to be able to go around town with over to Company 3 to guys with Stefan Sonnefeld, Stefan Nakamura, who I was actually tape operators with at the Post group. And I was able to teach them software-based color correction. They were still on old school Da Vinci's, running, what was the thing? It wasn't a rank, but the Spirit. They were running film on Spirit. So in software color correction, it was the first time that everything was scanned digitally, which was, I was used to that workflow because that's how Flame worked. Everything worked off of that. So I was able to learn the tips and tricks of color correction from the masters while I taught them things. I'd learned from them. So it was really great to have guys like Steve Purcell to learn how to manage clients, manage the room, and things like that, and then learn the skills that I needed for compositing, and then to be able to learn from the best colorists in Hollywood. And then I went all over the world. I went to IBC, NAB, SIGGRAPH. We showed the first Tesro that could actually play back 4K, and that was 90 or no, yeah, that was 2003. So 4K actually, 2003. That was pretty good. And working with the guys from Autodesk, I learned everybody up there, and bread and butter was Flame for many years. And then I started doing more color work. I became the senior colorist at DreamWorks Animation, and I did all their stereo movies. And I actually did the first stereo movie on Assimilate Scratch with Lucas Wilson being my.
Yes.
It was the only system that did stereo at the time. So yeah. I've been very lucky to be on the forefront of technology, and the big thing is, the friends in the business and working vendors, knowing the vendors from Autodesk and knowing how a vendor worked, how always buy at the end of the sales year and things like that when you can get a deal from the sales guy, and helping the sales guys make the number, and what a number was, and so that all really great experience, very lucky.
And it sounds like it was your relationships that also allowed the technology to be better received, because it's always better when you're chatting with friends about, hey, there's that back and forth, and it's always great to work with Steve, because whenever things kind of fell apart, Steve would just simply say, "Today's going to be exciting," just calmly. So since you've worked in both roles, how would you say the mindset of a colorist is different than that of a VFX compositor? Because with all these shifts in production, especially VFX, what's that mindset, and how are you getting new gigs, new business driving your way with working remote?
Yeah, I mean the first thing regarding the mindset of a compositor and a colorist. With a compositor, you're maybe working on a sequence for a long time, months, weeks, things like that. And as a colorist, you're working on the whole film for months, weeks, depending on the schedule. If you're doing a independent film, you may only have a week, to do it. But if you're doing like a stereo film, like Avengers, where working with Steve Scott and a team of like 3 other colorists, where you have thousands of visual effects shots coming in and things like that. That's a lot more crazy. But because I was a compositor, I kind of knew what to expect, from the visual effects and, things like that. And if there was something that needed to be fixed, we could talk to Steve, who would talk to the Marvel people and say, hey, maybe we can do it this way, and have things come in better. So as a compositor, you're thinking about a shot. I mean, I had a Castaway shot where Tom Hanks is up on the top of the hill. We actually did another movie in between that, but by the time we got the tracking guys on it and the roto guys on it, and it was a 2.5-minute shot, which couldn't even fit on the 500 gig flame array, because I couldn't fit all the elements, so I had to bring stuff on and off and things like that. But I mean, that shot actually took a year from when it was shot to finish. But I did like 100 other shots in between, because I was waiting for the team to do the match move. We needed a 3D match move, and my friend Tom Linus, who just recently passed away, one of the best visual effects Maya artists in the business, he came in to do the track using a new French military tracking software. And then I had my water guy that I worked with on Titanic, Joel Kreisnick, that he was doing the water, but he had to wait until the match move was done for the water. And then it was shot on a piecemeal blue screen in Malibu, so it had to be rotoscoped. And we actually had 2 roto guys that quit because, and the new guy had to like start over, because it was so, it was 2.5 minutes. It was way too long of a shot, way too hard. And that's what happens. So that's the differences. As a colorist, you work weeks and months on stuff, and as a compositor, you work days on it.
So what would you tell someone who's wanting to break into the VFX part of the business today?
Well, you can't ignore the elephant in Hollywood. That artificial intelligence and machine learning are really the biggest thing. So when I speak to universities now, some of the best guys I know, actually a guy that I helped mentor, Tashi True, went to Chapman with my daughter, and I'd met him there, and they had Assimilate Scratch. Mike Agoric sold him Autodesk Luster. Well, I helped mentor him. I got him into Technicolor, and he's now James Cameron's main colorist. did the last two Avatar movies, does Battlefield Angel, does all the remastering now. And he's a young man of like 35, and he beat out all the other guys. And he goes down to Park Road Post down in New Zealand. And what a lot of other big colorists do is they have entourage. They have a producer, they have, their assistants and things like that. Tashi's a one-man show. So he can, because he came up as an assist and things like that. So I would recommend you become very self-sufficient. Don't rely on others. Don't think that you need an entourage or a producer. And then one of the things that Tashi can do is he can program. He knows C++ and things like that. And that's the beauty of coming out of college now, is take your computer classes, take art and design classes, and so that's computer classes, art design classes, and learn artificial intelligence. So now there's actually in Resolve there's auto shot matching and things like that, and then there's color AI that actually can do machine learning based color matching, where you can go in and pick from a library of looks, and then you can use the machine learning to match the shots for you. So that's really good, and that's the way a show normally works doing color, is you go in and you do your hero shots, and then you get the client to buy those, and then you just make the rest of the film look like that. Well, that's a lot easier if you go in, make your master shot, and then say, okay, here's all the same as. And I think a lot of the systems will be able to pick out the same as's, now too. So you'll just be able to say, okay, here's the hero, populate it through. So, that's going to save many days of what was. It's still, there's the creative aspect of it, because you're creating the hero master shot, but you're just using automation to make yourself more efficient.
Exactly. So what I'm hearing is embrace the AI and how it can help you, and understand everything around what it is that your focus is, so that you've got a deeper bench to get the next things going for you, and be able to be self-sufficient. So speaking of deeper, let's get a little bit deeper into color space with all these new different deliverables and timelines that are out there. And since you've been on set doing look management, what would you tell DPs and then later post supervisors that they should know about keeping the color pipeline tight?
I mean, the big thing really is, the hardest thing since I've come back to Wisconsin and done more independent films. Previously, the independent films I did were for USC and UCLA students that I would do. Even while I was at DreamWorks, I'd do live action stuff on student films to keep fresh on the live action things. I think the biggest thing that I see is people shooting a lot of different cameras. There is a reason to do it for some things, like having a crash cam or a drone, things like that. But if you can keep at least your cameras the same make, like right now, the studio I'm working with, they have all Sony cameras. So they have A7s, they have an FX9. My preference really is, and I'm spoiled because I've worked with the best DPs in the business. I did animation shows. I did How to Train Your Dragon with Roger Deakins. And then I went up to Canada and did the Revenant with Emmanuel Lubinski, Chivo. And all the cameras, both those guys are Arri guys. I was very lucky when I was working with Roger. I said, because I had worked with the Viper and all these other, that's how I got into color correction was I knew digital cameras, and the telecine guys didn't. I had started as a camera guy, so I embraced it, and I knew digital files, and I knew lookup tables, which was something else that the traditional colorists didn't use. So back to kind of your question, the big thing is before you shoot, do a test shoot with your cameras. Come up with a show LUT they can put on the monitor. And that was actually one of the things that I did with Brian Gaffney and Dan Lyon. Was we did the first on-set color correction on an ESPN show called The Bronx is Burning. And with Marker at +8, we had built a truck that was actually a mobile theater. It was a 35-foot race car hauler. We actually bought it on the east side of Simi. I saw these big trailers, and then they said, Dan and Brian said, well, let's get the extendo thing on it. It was built to haul 2 race cars in it. So we put an 8-foot screen and a projector in it, and took it to the East Coast. And the Thompson Viper had a green look on it. Well, that freaked everybody out on set.
Yeah.
So what we did was we did a bunch of test shoots under different indoor and outdoor lighting conditions, and I made up a menu with little thumbnails on it that we printed out, so that the DP Doug Coe could go in and he would say, okay, let's put try look 27. They look at the monitor and things like that. Well, then there was the big question. It was like, how do we track the metadata? Can we do all that? And I said, put the LUT number on the slate, so I can just roll in, mark on it, and I was on Assimilate Scratch. Mark the in, mark the out, throw the LUT on it, and then it was pretty much good to go. So we were actually able to cut time in final post because we had the lookup table, was all ready to go. So for 8-episode ESPN show that worked out, that was a period piece about the Yankees during Son of Sam things. It was called The Bronx is Burning, which was a famous quote from Howard Cosell. That was kind of the beginning of on-set color management. Now the other thing is really get a good DIT. Some of the biggest shows, I was in another show in Connecticut called The Good Nurse for Netflix, had a really great DIT, and I was actually working for eFilm doing dailies on that, where I would get a CDL, the ASC color decision list. Mm-hmm. I would get that, and I would just load that up, and that was my starting point for the dailies. And then I'd go, I'd do the creative aspect of stuff from there. So I would say the most important things for producers is to have a good buttoned-up DIT that uses the ASCDL. There's now automated dailies. Brian Gaffney's pushing MIT automated dailies, where it automatically finds the slate point, syncs the audio, grabs the CDL, puts it on it, and you don't even have to, do all that stuff. So I was lucky that at the time they still wanted people on location because they wanted short turnaround and things like that. Mm-hmm. And on the Revenant, the fact that Chivo didn't shoot with any lighting, and when Brian actually told me about that show, he was working at Technicolor and it was coming through. He was Chivo was Steve Scott's client, and they said the guys are going to win. Chivo and Alejandro are going to win an Oscar for Birdman, and this show is being highlighted as going to be Leonardo DiCaprio's first Oscar. So everybody came into it with really high expectations. Oscar award-winning director. It's going to be Leonardo's first Oscar. So with Chivo not shooting with lights, they were worried about the dailies. So basically, normally with dailies, you do one setting and one size fits all for that take. Well, with this show, because he was shooting into the sun and into the shadows and things like that, I was like animating and doing power windows and all kinds of stuff on 2 hours, 2.5 hours of footage every night. So I was basically trying to do a feature, a 2-hour feature in a 8 to 10 hour shift. So that was, that was definitely, you learn to get fast when you have to do that. And the reason was because they were shooting in sequence, and they were worried that the studio would get nervous if the dailies looked dark or too bright and things like that. So by having an on-set colorist, and I'd work with Chivo and Alejandro every night after they had been in the snow, in the river, and all that stuff, all day, they would come in and they would speak Spanish to each other, and I knew they were talking to me when Chivo would say something like, make that brighter in English. Other than that, I didn't think I would be in Canada and have to know Spanish, but it would have been helpful.
Well, I mean, you live and learn, and we can always learn that later. So your latest project has been building the virtual production stage at Hinckley Production there in Wisconsin, Madison to be exact.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about how this all came together and the types of productions you're expecting to have the space to have a good impact on?
Yeah, we just in Wisconsin just got a new film incentive package. So there actually was a meeting. I still try and, when I was in LA, I'd, go to the VES meetings. I was in SIMPTE. I'd always go to the key code parties and to the band pro parties and things like that to network. So an opportunity came up to go to a session that was talking about the film incentives. They hadn't been passed yet, or they were just about to pass. And so I went to a seminar, and Natalie Hinckley was the moderator on the seminar. So and she kind of led off with, and I didn't know her. I knew very few people in Madison except for the people from the 48-hour film project, which is basically you get a premise at the beginning of the 48, and then you have 48 hours to shoot and edit the whole thing. Those were most of the independent filmmakers that I knew. So Natalie said, she goes, we just bought a bunch of LED screens. And I had been working with that, even as long as 8 years ago in LA. There was some places that had camera tracking and things. It was just the very beginning of virtual productions. And I kept up with it, and I knew Assimilate Scratch. So I had been staying on that. I went to NAB. I'd stay up on the technology and things like that. Natalie said, we're in Madison. We just bought a bunch of LED screens. So she's got actually 4 LED screens. We have one set up in the studio. We can set up a second. After the seminar was done, I went up and I said, Natalie, I said, I'm your guy. I said, you're not going to find anybody in the state of Wisconsin that was, or even in Chicago, which has a couple stages, who knows more about this and knows the gear to get in here. So that's one of the things that Assimilate has been doing with their Effects Live package, which, so I had used Assimilate Scratch on The Bronx is Burning, on Journey to the Center of the Earth, which is the stereo show, and things like that. So I was very familiar with Assimilate and things like that. So I actually called up Jeff Edson. I said, hey, I got a client here that's just putting the stages together. I said, can you give me an eval, and we'd get stuff set up. So we got everything set up, and the latest thing including image-based lighting, which you can actually sample part of the image and feed that to LED lights for reflections and things like that. So that's really great. So I know the tool, I know the guys, I know compositing. The other thing we needed to get was Retracker Bliss, was the package that is the camera tracking package. So the LED screen will actually move based on the camera movements.
Yeah, the Frenum moves to show what should be in focus. Yep.
Yeah, and the stuff that we envision doing is car commercials work really well for that you don't have to have a trailer. You can do all your interiors. You don't have external noise. You don't have to have police escorts through town and things like that. And with the image-based lighting, you can get the reflections and things like that. And our first project was actually a tabletop shoot for a beverage. It was a cannabis infused beverage that must have came from Illinois because they don't have it in Wisconsin. But yeah, so the client actually made these psychedelic backgrounds and very cool stuff, and he had a snorkel lens for the close-ups. So, I mean, it just really worked great. I mean, you wouldn't have been able to do that stuff with a blue screen or a green screen, which basically is what virtual production is replacing. And I've done a million blue screens and green screens. You know, it's first you have to, isolate the object, and then you have to control the spill and things like that. Well, with a tabletop shoot, when you're trying to get real interactive reflections and on a car commercial and or a dialogue scene, you want those reflections and things, which blue screens and green screens, you got to deal with the spill, make sure that nothing is blue or green depending on, you know how when the weather girl shows up with a green dress,
Yes.
it just doesn't work.
It makes it a little difficult to work. You've definitely been the advanced recon group for that, because you've been in that space for a while. So let's chat a little bit about your help to the next generation of filmmakers and how they can get to the table. You've lectured at universities around the world, and mentoring emerging filmmakers and helping on their projects is something you're genuinely passionate about. This biz has always been about learn on the job. You're an assistant, you then become the colorist, you're a junior compositor, you work your way up through that chain. Is that still how it works today, or has that path changed from what you've seen?
It's changed quite a bit because a lot of the assistant jobs used to be rotoscoping, and now there's machine learning tools that will rotoscope for you. Many of the commercial shops, when I'm doing flame work, like during COVID, you were talking about remote. Here I was in Wisconsin. I still had my LA connections, and really we had lived in Simi Valley for 23 years, and and we were there for a reason because the business was there. But then when I was at DreamWorks, very sheltered. There because you have consistent work. You're not chasing around town trying to get clients in and all that stuff. The world changed. Canada, Vancouver, British Columbia had put in some really great tax incentives, and basically all the companies that I used to work for, Digital Domain, Sony, Rhythm and Hughes, what was left of it, they all went to Vancouver chasing the tax incentives. And at first, they had the Americans come up there and work because they didn't have a talent base. But what they did was they invested in their universities to bring up and train artists. So like now, it's very difficult for a U.S. based artist to even get a work permit to go up and work for Canada, because the incentive, which the base of the incentive was to promote a Canadian-based workforce. So, I have traveled the world. I lived in Beijing, China, actually for 6 months and built a visual effects academy and virtual reality academy over there. This was before I actually had worked at Jaunt, but it was one of those things where I saw virtual reality coming up, and I had some friends that were doing it. And Michael Mansoria from the camera rental company, he Radiant Images, he had a bunch of rigs, and I had been going over there and learning that. So I took that knowledge and I went to China. Started a visual effects academy. Well, we had to recruit students for it. So I actually spent 5 months traveling throughout China, planes, trains, and automobiles, and going through. And I would just basically say, "Where are we going today?" And they'd say Tengzhou, and I said, "Well, where's that?" And Then I'd get out a map and figure out, and it all depends on how many stops we had, whether we were flying or taking the high-speed train, was really great. So I was able to speak to probably 30, 40 universities. And of course, I don't speak Mandarin, so I had a translator that traveled with me and made the travel arrangements and took really good care. You don't want some guy from California, Wisconsin running loose on his own through China,
I know.
lecturing at universities. So she was really good. I got her up to speed on the terminology, even though she wasn't in the business. And I wasn't sure actually how it came out because I don't know. Everybody clapped and thought it was really good. And the other funny thing was, because I don't look like the typical Asian, they would want pictures. So it'd be like I was a rock star after the thing with all these people taking pictures and Titanic, yeah. So that was really great, sharing that knowledge with the world on that. And then that led to going to University of Breda in the Netherlands to talk about virtual production and things like that. And then some of the other schools, I talked to Cal State Northridge. I lecture with them, even still today. American Film Institute, New York Film Academy at Universal. I'll still do remote sessions, talking, mainly about like dailies, LUTs, editorial, things like that. And because I'm old school, because I came up as a tape operator, I know the whole food chain, and I understand how important it is to capture things, properly. And everybody says, 18 stops of latitude. Well, you know what? If you need 18 stops of latitude, you shouldn't be running a camera. I mean, get it in the middle and let your colorist at least have, something to grab onto, to go there and things like that. So, that's kind of been one of the challenges with working with more independent films. I'm doing mostly independent films. I did go to Kazakhstan in the beginning of the year. I had been there 12 years ago, and I did 3 films in a month. And then 12 years later, I see the producer on one of the shows, and I'd done 5 other shows remotely with them, nosing around on my LinkedIn, and I have LinkedIn Pro. I'd always recommend that, LinkedIn Pro, because then you can see who's looking at your profile. So I reached out. I said, "Hey, Marina," I said, "I see you nosing around on my LinkedIn. What's up?" And she goes, "I got a movie." And I said, "I'm available." She goes, "Well, what can you do?" And I said, I can do anything." So I became the visual effects supervisor, the post-production supervisor, and the colorist on the film. So I did that work remote. Got 2 facilities. I got my friend Cully from Scully Effects, and I got another company from South Korea to do 150 shots. So I managed those shots as the visual effects supervisor. And then they wanted me to come out to Kazakhstan to finish the movie. So in actually this time last year, middle of March, I flew to Almaty, Kazakhstan, did the grading, and then we also went to the client was actually in the capital of Kazakhstan, which was Almaty. So planes, trains, and automobiles flying back and forth to Almaty. And of course, I had a really good wingman there, because once again, you don't want a California, Wisconsin guy running amok in Kazakhstan. So I had a wingman, and I'd go out and, I'd take, they actually had, it was the 70th anniversary of the victory over Germany. And they had a lot of, I'm like you, airplane guy. So it was fun to see like the Su-27s, 57s flying around at air shows and things during these tributes. So it's really been good. And of course, I trained up another colorist there on Resolve and things. And then I did another show after that, a 8-episode series called Koba. So, I mean, between the Wisconsin stuff and the Kazakhstan stuff, that's what really made my year. And as you know, there's not that much work coming out of LA. I mean, LA is still trying to come back from the strikes, and I see that they're negotiating again. And they said, "Oh yeah, we'll extend the talks," and it's like, well, thank God you've
Yeah.
it's sadly the question of, oh, AI or to not AI panicked everybody. The writers were panicked, and the best thing that they did was stop the studios from throwing all their old scripts in and training the bots on writing based on old scripts. For actors, we've been using digital actors since Titanic. We had a 100-foot model. One of my shots was a TD 47, Titanic Departure 47, was aerate water, prisms, splashes, and waves, and little soft damage people all on the 100-foot boat. I mean, and the guy that bonks off the propeller, yeah, he was a digital stunt guy. So, I mean, it's the fact that we're using captured people and scans of people. That was one of the big actors, things. We've been doing that for 30 years. So, and there's so many people. I'm on this thing called Crew Stories on Facebook too. And, there's so many people that were working on set that just didn't recover from, even though that they maybe were carpenters and things like that. They weren't able to transition out of the business, lost their cars, lost their houses, and things like that. So I'm fortunate that people in post, were able to work remotely, and now I'm able to do color, and now I have this virtual production stage, basically an hour away, which I applied for a bunch of different jobs in Wisconsin, but they look at my resume and they think, oh, he's either too expensive or he'll just, whatever. So there was a lot of jobs like Vortex that makes scopes and things like that is only a few miles away from me. They had an editor job, and I went in there to the interview, and I said, what would really be cool is virtual reality, where you show them how the scopes work and the sighting mechanism. Well, I totally spooked them, so I didn't get that job. But yeah, Natalie's really been great, and the guys from Assimilate with helping me learn the things, the camera tracking, that type of stuff. I mean, the virtual production, once you know it, it all seems simple. But the learning curve for a lot of it is fairly steep.
So my takeaway from that, the tip I would say for folks who are getting into the business, the deeper thing about the craft and the career is to A, never stop learning, and B, never stop teaching, because it's led to a number of different new opportunities for you. And it allows you to be flexible and pop into all sorts of other roles.
Absolutely. And yeah, never stop learning is absolutely true. It's just like, we're friends on LinkedIn and Facebook, and, I'm always going through on LinkedIn and finding, what's new. And, and that's one of the other things that's really important is continue networking. So even though I'm not going to the, to the SMPTE stuff and things, and I was hoping of going to NAB this year, but now with the airline ticket prices up, and you just can't drive, and I never drove anyways. I was a huge Southwest guy. I was always Burbank, and it's only 45 minutes from Simi to Burbank, and there was only a few times I drove, over.
Oddly enough, I always drive to Vegas. It's just the thing for me. I like having my car there. It makes it easy. The only thing that's difficult I found is everybody's charging for parking these days.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's I'm a big trade show guy, and I even do it here when Keycode had their Chicago events.
Hmm.
I went to to two of them. Run into you there,
Yeah.
and always good to see Mike and things like that. And like I said, it's important to stay close to the vendors. I mean I'm the vendor's best friend, and they're my best friend. I'll bring in their gear. If I see something that a company needs, or even for file transfer and things like that. It's like, oh, we got all this stuff to move. Well, let's go to SohoNet.
Hmm.
And then I go into LinkedIn. Who's my SohoNet connection? And
There's Chuck.
yeah, and
Exactly.
Aspera, it's the same thing. So yeah, it's you really need to never stop learning because it continues to change. And everybody asks me, it's just like, oh, where did you learn, what you did? Well, when I was in high school, it was Pascal and punch cards
Hmm.
for computers, and then I don't even remember if I had any computer courses in college because I was in radio, television, and film. Um, but but the thing that got me going was my ability to be able to thread a 1-inch machine, and that got me my first three jobs in LA that I could thread a machine. I knew how to read a scope, and to this day, it's like you're still reading a scope. You're still looking. You're looking for clipping and different gamuts and different color spaces, and why does this camera look like this, and that type of stuff. So I mean, it all goes back to what I learned at the Post Group and the connections that I made there.
Excellent. Jeff, this has been fantastic. Over 35 years, over 100 films, and you're still clearly fired up about the craft. And I think that says everything. Thank you for joining me here on the script.
My pleasure.
To, to our audience, thanks for dropping by with us here today on the script. Please hit those like and subscribe buttons, and special thanks to Avid Technology for providing the editorial platform that I use. If you got a workflow that's ailing you, the doctor's in. Drop me a line at drpostproduction@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody.